Hello and welcome to our MOOC, Launching New Ventures. I'm Chris.
And I'm Mark.
We're both professors here at EPFL, the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, which is a hotbed of entrepreneurship and innovation. Every month, roughly 2 new companies are created here.
So EPFL is located in Lausanne in Switzerland, and Switzerland is also a country where a lot of technology development happens. We didn't design that course only for Switzerland. Quite to the contrary, this course has a very international scope. So we try to make it relevant for many, many countries around the globe.
Yeah, I mean, many MOOCs are designed with one specific country in mind, whereas what we try to do with this MOOC is to make it so it's applicable to many different contexts, many different regions, including Africa and other parts of the world.
So we designed that course with you in mind, drawing on our rich research experience of more than 30 years combined, as well as our experience in teaching entrepreneurs and in consulting with entrepreneurs. So there's lots of experience to draw from, and we use that in order to craft a MOOC that is compelling to you. We know that for many people, entrepreneurship is a life-changing event. So maybe this MOOC will change your life and lead you to some greener pastures.
Now, what we've done with this MOOC is we followed along an entrepreneurial process. The MOOC itself is only going to be 5 weeks long total. And what we've done is we've picked the subjects that are absolutely critical, the most specific things that you need to launch your business. So we think this is going to be both fun and educational.
Truly fun, exactly. So without further ado, let's get going and let's look at what entrepreneurship actually means.
Yes, what is entrepreneurship? Well, one definition of entrepreneurship is it's bringing resources together to create value.
What type of value?
It could be any kind of value. It could be economic value, social value. There's eco-entrepreneurship.
Social entrepreneurship.
Social entrepreneurship. There's lots of different things, but what we're going to focus on in this MOOC is going to be on the economic value creation for the growth ventures, although the other things will probably fall into place once you have a viable business proposition.
Exactly. So this word entrepreneurship actually comes from a French term, entreprendre, and if you thought, well, entrepreneurship is something cool and new, here's the bad news right at the beginning of the MOOC. It's actually a term that was used since the 17th century, and there was one person, a scientist, Richard Cantillon. He used that term in the 17th century for the first time. So what did he observe? He actually observed people like Marco Polo and contrasted them with how business activity was done in the ancient marketplaces at the time. So Marco Polo, he was a merchant adventurer. He traveled to the Far East. He bought silk, he bought tea, and he brought the stuff back to the marketplaces here in Europe, and think about these marketplaces at those days, what did they sell?
Local businesses, butchers and carpenters, farmers markets, etc., where people congregated in one public space.
So now imagine Marco Polo being on one of these marketplaces and saying, okay, I have silk for you, I have tea for you. The customers wouldn't know these types of products, and so it was an innovation that Marco Polo brought about, but it also was risky because he had expenditures, when he was in India.
Quite a lot of expenditures before he was able to get a return on his
even not knowing exactly what he would get in a return.
Right.
So that has traces of entrepreneurship there, doing something innovative. But on the other hand, he did also not finance his travels by himself. What Marco Polo actually did, he found capitalists who financed his travels to the Far East. And when he was in the Far East, he brought the goods back. And when he sold them at a profit, he shared the profits with these capitalists. 75% would go into the pocket of the capitalist and 25% would be going into Marco Polo's pocket. And that sounds awfully familiar to what we see nowadays in venture capital. So there are also traces here of entrepreneurship. So in essence, I think these early observations shaped the field of entrepreneurship quite a bit, and entrepreneurial behavior as such is actually rooted in many of us here. It's not something special in that sense. It's quite conventional that we see entrepreneurship, because if you think back into the ancient times, everyone was an entrepreneur. There were no large organizations or public organizations, governments to work for. Everyone had to find ways to trade and to produce something and to sell something. So entrepreneurship as such is everywhere. And I think it's time that you discover whether you might be a good entrepreneur.
So according to this Cantillon example, you can think about Marco Polo as a great case of someone who had an entrepreneurial mindset. He was an entrepreneurial thinker who had gone through several entrepreneurial events or milestones, and who's someone who participated in a whole entrepreneurial process. These are kind of the 3 ways of thinking about entrepreneurship, and we're going to discuss each of those. First, we're going to think about the kinds of people who would be entrepreneurial minded. This could be anywhere. It could be a founder of a company, or it could be someone in a big company having an entrepreneurial mindset. Someone who wants to take risk.
So in a way, you know, by looking at the content of our MOOC, you can see, well, what are the components of an entrepreneurial mindset and how may I nurture as a person my entrepreneurial mindset?
Right. And then what we'll do is we'll think a little bit about the entrepreneurial events or milestones that happened during the course of the entrepreneurial process. And then we'll also mainly organize this MOOC around point number 3, which is the entrepreneurial process itself.
Exactly. So we have a pre-launch phase and a post-launch phase. In the pre-launch phase, we look at content, for instance, like opportunity identification. In the post-launch phase, we look at growth, about making your sales, entrepreneurial marketing, etc. Exactly. So all of this stuff will be organized around the entrepreneurial process as a timeline in that sense. So you may ask yourself, is entrepreneurship actually for me? You know, you might think, well, maybe I'm too old, maybe I'm too young, maybe I'm living in a region where entrepreneurship is not so prevalent. But here are 2 statistics that are quite important. You know, we don't want to bore you here with lots of statistics, but these are 2 interesting tidbits that you want to know. You know, first, look at this slide here. It's like it shows you the distribution of entrepreneurship across different age group, across different regions. I think the main takeaway is that entrepreneurship is everywhere. You know, you see it across the globe.
Right.
And you know, what's quite amazing is lots of entrepreneurship actually here in Africa. And in other countries, US, of course, you know, that's typically considered as an entrepreneurial country, but also here in Europe and other countries, you know, so that's quite an important takeaway. You know. The second takeaway is here on the next slide.
Right, so if you look at this slide, I think what strikes you is that, yes, there's slightly more men than women in entrepreneurship worldwide. However, it's really quite well distributed between men and women, almost equal across all parts of the globe.
So it's not a male-dominated area. You know, it's very democratic in that sense. If you look at the larger corporations, we are still discussing that there's gender equality, but look at this. Here we have gender equality.
Also, you've got the different regions of the world too.
Exactly.
And most people think about North America as being the place where entrepreneurship, but if you look at these graphics, I think you'll see that really it's happening everywhere, and even to some extent more than in North America.
That's why I want to reiterate what we said before. This is a course that is really targeted at a global audience and not just a specific country or specific regions. You know, this is targeted to males, to females, to people in Asia, to people in Africa, to all people around the globe in a way. You know?
So in this MOOC, we're going to have an emphasis on the technology-driven entrepreneurship businesses.
And if you think about technology-driven entrepreneurship, it's about having an innovative technology, trying to commercialize it. You know, it's like Marco Polo, the example. You're doing something innovative to the market. Customers might not know it. So there are some unique challenges that you are facing when you are trying to create this type of venture, a technology-driven one. You know? In contrast, there's the self-employed entrepreneurship where you are
right, the self-employment.
You know?
It could be that this will still be relevant for self-employment businesses. But in a self-employment type situation, you know, you're usually more of an imitation type business, usually made for a lifestyle without a big growth option. But the material in this course will also be relevant to those people too. But we will place more of an emphasis on the growth aspects of this. So where are these technology-driven companies coming from?
Well, these technologies are usually or oftentimes developed at universities, so they might be coming from technology transfer offices. They might also be coming from larger corporations where some employees might say, well, we have a cool new technology, our headquarters are not interested in actually commercializing this business, so we do it. You know, we form a group and we spin out a company from the larger corporation.
Or it could be individual inventors making things in their mythical garages.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be a garage, it could also be a basement, but that's typically where the entrepreneurs start off.
We always talk about the garage.
They don't have the funds to hire fancy office buildings. So there are lots of origins, you know, and there might be different ones, so we don't want to exclude the other ones. But these are 3 conventional ones, three ones that are often encountered.
So as I mentioned before, this course is structured around the entrepreneurial process. So what we'll do is in the next segment, we'll go through a lot of the details about how the course is structured and what to expect over the next 5 weeks. So stay with us.